Amber Hawthorne, or at least that was the surname I gave to myself before I met my true love, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I may not look it, but I'm actually a half gold, half white dragon, with a bit of human within me. You could probably figure out why I mentioned the importance of my name now, I guess. But that part of my story starts off a bit somber. You see, my father, Virag, is a white dragon who fell in love with my mother, a golden dragon, long ago and decided to raise a clutch of hatchlings. This was quite rare, almost unheard of, as the dragon clans didn't fully support the relationship of different dragon species. Hybrids were scarce and far between. That being said, my parents' love was so great, the two went against their cultures and had a clutch of eggs together. Unfortunately, disaster struck when my father was away, as a gang of green dragons discovered our nest. Though my mother fought with all the courage and skill she could muster, all my siblings were lost, and my mother along with them. I alone survived the carnage. My father, in the depths of grief and having discovered my egg, realized that without my mother's aid, as a white dragon, he did not have enough confidence to raise me properly. He felt I deserved a better life. Thus, he turned to a close friend of theirs, my stepfather, the wizard Hawthorne, giving my egg to him to protect and raise as his own, until the day came when I was ready to be reunited with my father once again. I was none the wiser of all this, for what little I can remember was the good old days of bounding up and down my home at Wizard's Tower, enjoying the bounties of food and sweets. Hawthorne gifted me the name Amber, based on the coloration of my scales, and loved me like his own daughter, though raising a baby dragon proved to be a much more challenge than the wizard father could have predicted. I'll admit, I did get into a bit of trouble as I grew, breaking furniture, sneaking late stacks, and maybe stealing a cookie jar or 5? Needless to say, I did give my human father quite the thrill when it came to raising me as well as protecting me from danger. No spider ever got near me. Haha, spiders! Anyways, as I grew, my immense appetite and rapidly growing size was hindering his studies, and I was losing space in my nest, or bedroom I mean, which inevitably did force him to think on his feet on how to suppress my rapid growth. But his brilliance and creativity persevered in the face of a hungry baby dragon, for he created a special magical amulet for me to wear at all times to shrink my size down, thereby my hunger would be easier to manage for the both of us. Though there wasn't much he could do for the evil cookie monster side of myself, but I think he enjoyed that side of my personality. As time went on, Hawthorne taught me the ways of many different humanoid cultures, like their mannerisms and how some could use magic like he did. He also told me a little about dragon kind, and how we're able to transform into our human forms to be less intimidating to, smaller beings. It was something that came of great importance for him that I focused on these particular lessons, as he would tell me how many of the dragon people, like golden dragons, tend to focus on protecting those much smaller than they are. That, as a dragon, it was my duty to make sure I helped those who were not as big as I was, and thus, mastering my ability to become more humanoid would help me to be more approachable to those who would be frightened of me. I admit I was a little wobbly walking on skinny elven girl legs at first, but I realized how fun it could be when I was able to try on different types of clothes for the first time. All his teachings were entertaining and very beneficial to my life, I won't lie. My ability to speak Draconic came naturally to me, as did my fire-breathing skills, much to the dismay of my father's poor furniture. I may have accidentally burnt half of his library in attempts to light some candles for him at one point. But what was more frustrating than having a grumpy wizard yelling at you over a few burnt notes was not knowing how to fly properly. While he'd be observing from the tower, I would stretch my wings as far as I could, flapping and soaring for short trips on end, never really getting higher than a few feet off the ground. There would be days where gliding was the best I could attempt. I'm not gonna lie when I say that my epic crashes were rather frequent, to the point that I had to give the landscape a break from all the destruction I created. The worst crash that happened on a cold winter night while I was practicing near torches where Hawthorne could see me. In my attempt to take off at a higher rate of speed, my amulet necklace got caught on a branch and was ripped from my neck, forcing my true size to take shape. The immediate overwhelming hunger followed by a slam of fatigue hit me like a punch to the face and stomach at once, forcing me to drop to the snowy ground. Thankfully, I came to as soon as the amulet was placed back on, but it was a valuable lesson I learned that night. I remember Hawthorne saying to me,
"Amber, without the amulet, you will grow into your true size, and as a result, extreme fatigue and hunger will begin to overwhelm you if you don't have the strength or mind to overcome it. Never remove this amulet unless it is absolutely necessary. Eventually one day you will grow into it, but you must be patient."
I nodded to him reassuringly and promised I would do my best to follow his words. He did teach me other things though once I gained more confidence in my fire breathing and flying abilities. But when it came time for me to ask what my actual parents were like, he would get sad and change the subject. He would teach me a bit more about dragonkind, but whenever it came to my parents, I never seemed to get a full answer. Needless to say, this was frustrating, but I despised myself to making him upset. So, over time, I came to accept this from him and paid closer attention to his other teachings, such as how to read and write, how to speak giant, and even taught me some tricks on how to fend for myself in the wild. Since, aside from my own dragon talents, I really couldn't understand magic like he did, despite some minor hiccups in learning how to fly and not fully understanding dragon culture or the truth about my parents. I can say without question that my hatchling years were filled with joy, and lots of cookies. Little did I know that soon those days would come to an end. You see, unlike dragons who can live for hundreds, if not thousands of years, I soon discovered that humans could not. As time went by, my father became older and weaker, until finally on the morning of his deathbed, he told me it was time for me to venture out into the world without him. He had taught me all I needed to know to survive out in the wilds, how to behave myself around humanoids, to keep my dragon appearance down to a minimum so I didn't attract any unwanted attention, and of course, know how to forage and hunt for myself. I assured him that he had taught me well, and that I would never forget his teachings. And with that stated his final words.
"I love you, my little cookie monster."
My wizard father had done all he could to raise me, and I had promised to do my best to honor his efforts in any way I can. After I buried him in the tower gardens of our home, I packed everything I thought I could need and set out to the world of Altastica, carrying his name with me as Amber Hawthorne. Life outside the tower was much different than I had expected, but boy was it a thrill to explore. I made my way to a place called Gatless town and dubbed it my main territory for the next few years. I got by on foraging for food or taking up small jobs for money. It wasn't much of a challenge to find work surprisingly in the beginning, since apparently some humanoid locals would need help with rowdy guests within the local taverns, and I apparently was the strongest bouncer they'd ever seen. There was also the occasional local construction work that required some heavy lifters. Needless to say, I did get some odd looks, considering my human form was in the shape of that of an elven girl with red long hair and scrappy clothes. I suppose it didn't help the fact that on occasion my dragon's traits would pop out in form of horns on my tail, but thankfully not many pestered me on those details. Living amongst the humans or humanoids of this town was never dull in the slightest. I learned even more about their traditions and games, such as arm wrestling, or drinking contests to see how much beer one could hold. I'll admit, I was tempted to educate some of the ignorant youngsters on how a real dragon holds their beer without my amulet holding me back. But my father's words always rang true in the back of my mind. Eating contests, though, that was by far my most favorite game. It hardly seemed fair as this was a normal meal to me. I guess eating the weight of 3 men would intimidate most humanoids of this town. As the days went by and the games grew short, many of the locals were no longer interested in challenging my aggressive appetites in eating or in the test of strength. So earning money for food became more of a challenge as work became scarce. I discovered that I would have to further hone my dragon instincts, hunting for my food and board when times got hard. I might have been alone, but I still welcomed the new challenge, as I felt in some strange way I was learning how to be a dragon, Hunting game was just as good of a sport to test my instincts, not to mention it was the only time I could truly be myself and not hide my pale golden scales. I could see why my father encouraged me to stay in my humanoid form around others though. One time, I surprised a hunter in the forest and he shot an arrow at me in fright. Thankfully, my scaly armor was able to bounce it off, though it was still a close call. The hunter apologized and ran off, but it was an eye-opener to keep my true form hidden as much as possible. Today I spend most of my time in the woods, patrolling my territory around Gatless town, hunting for what I need, and occasionally popping back into town to see what's new. In my human form, of course. Though oddly enough, I have noticed a change in my interests. I recently turned 100 years old, and remembering my teachings, by dragon standards I'm considered not a hatchling anymore, which has forced me to notice an undeniable craving to find a cave and start a horde of my own. This is an unusual instinct that I wish I could have asked my father more about, but for now I think I'll have to keep an eye on it, and not get tempted by shiny objects. The last thing I want is to be arrested for stealing. Hawthorne would be so disappointed in me. Perhaps staying in the forest on the outskirts was the best decision I could have made. Although, I have noticed some suspiciously odd activities with some new travelers coming in. I best keep my guard up and hope nothing of ill will will come about their visit. Hawthorne did always say that because dragons are much larger than other creatures, we should do our duty to protect those smaller than us, even if they are suspicious. I truly do hope I can live up to his words.